source elements.
Hey everyone, my name is Vincent. This is Robert, our co-founder. We're here today to talk to you about RTS and RTL. RTS is for syncing two timelines together, either between a DAW and another DAW, or a DAW and something like RTL. Let's talk a little bit about what these things are. RTS is Source Connect's built-in DAW timeline synchronization system. RTS is operated via a panel in Source Connect and uses Rewire, a common protocol for sync found in most DAWs. RTS makes ADR, overdub, and remote review workflows possible with Source Connect. It provides both transport control and timeline sync. RTL, Remote Timeline, is a small add-on application that can take the place of a DAW on the remote connection, thus making the setup easier for the talent or reviewer on that side of the connection.
So how does RTS work? First, the SE Rewire component or plugin is required to be present in the DAW at each side of the connection. This is achieved in different ways with different DAWs, but often it's a plugin, as is the case with Pro Tools, or an instrument plugin, as with Cubase. Then, depending on the workflow, one side of the connection clicks on the RTS Send button in the RTS panel, and the other one clicks on the RTS Receive button in the RTS panel in Source Connect. The timelines on each side must have the same setup in terms of the sample rate, the tempo map if there is one, the song start, and the timecode settings such as frame rates, and of course the content in the timeline like your video and other audio. If RTS Review Mode is used, then the send side has to use Source Connect Pro because Source Connect Standard is not capable of sending RTS Review play commands. But the receive side of the connection can use Source Connect Standard to receive RTS Review play commands. There are two modes in RTS. There's Overdub mode and there's Review mode. Use Overdub mode to record a take, either ADR or overdubbing, when there's no engineer on the talent side of the connection, or it's better to have the director side of the connection run the transport. You would use Review mode to play back a take or to remotely review and tweak a mix with directors and stakeholders online. The RTS sender always controls the timeline of the RTS receiver. One thing to note is that it's not possible to have both sides in sync at the same time. One side has to chase the other or be in sync with the other. Therefore, content from one side of the connection will arrive in sync to the other side, but then the content going the other direction, if there is content going the other direction, will be delayed and be out of sync. So sync is only in one direction or the other. So depending on where the RTS sender presses play, it determines the direction of the sync. When the RTS sender presses play in their DAW, then the RTS receiver chases the RTS sender, and that's what we call Review mode. When the RTS sender presses play in Source Connect, then the RTS sender chases the RTS receiver, and that is Overdub mode. And that's what we'll talk about here. So we have a graphic that kind of shows the signal flow of RTS. Here the sender presses play in the RTS panel of Source Connect, and the play command will flow over to the RTS receiver on the remote side or the right side. And then when their system goes into play, the audio from them will flow back to the sender. That's the blue line with the arrows going to the left. And therefore, the audio received on the sender side will be from the remote side and will arrive in sync on the sender side. So we can show this to you in an example here. So the setup in the DAW for Source Connect is as follows. Any Rewire compatible DAW on either side can be used. Down here is the track that I just call Rewire. And in it, I have the instrument plugin Rewire set up. And that's all that's necessary to bring up the Rewire plugin for RTS compatibility in Pro Tools. So then I make my connection, as is the case here with Vincent, and I just have to click on the Send button in Source Connect, and now that puts me in control. Now on Vincent's side, he would click on the Receive. All right, so Vincent, go ahead and click on Receive so we can do an ADR take.
All right, I'm ready, and you guys should be seeing my screen now.
All right, so here I already have Vincent's track armed to record, and I'm just going to arm my transport to record, and then I'm going to initiate play in the Source Connect panel. And here we go, Vincent.
Signore Maestro.
Excellent. So There we just recorded a take. I controlled the transport and Vincent saw that. He heard his beeps and then did his performance. But the reality is that Vincent doesn't need to be using Pro Tools or any DAW. In this case, we can use the RTL application. RTL is great anytime a DAW is not available or it's too complex for the remote side of a connection. The RTL application can really make things much easier. The first thing you want to do is you want to convert the video that you're using to H.264, and then you can burn into that video any beeps and any wipes that you might need to cue the talent, and as well as the scratch track as well. And you can drop the scratch track out at any point where the talent is replacing a line. And then you're going to launch on your side the RTL creator. You're going to drag this video into the RTL creator, and you're going to assign it the same time code that your video sits at in your Pro Tools or your DAW timeline. At that point, you can decide if you're going to watermark it, you can put a password on it, and then you click the create button to actually create the file. So here we can show you how that goes over here. Right here is the RTL creator application. And I've already bounced down my H.264 video. And so that is right here. And I'm just going to drag that over here. And then I can give it the timecode location. And then I can click on create, give it a name. It's going to ask me to set a password. And we create the file. So now it's rendering the file. And once it's rendered, we can transfer that over to the talent using whatever you're using, Dropbox or WeTransfer, or just whatever transfer method you'd like to use to send them the file. At that point, the talent receives that file and they can open it up. So Vincent, if you want to show how that file is opened up, go ahead.
All right, so I already have the ADR player open here. So all I have to do is go ahead and select the timeline from that folder and then drag it over to the RTL player and enter the password. So the next thing I have to do, I got my timeline all set up. I hit receive in Source Connect in the RTS panel. Now I'm just going to change my output in the RTL player to my interface output and make sure the sound's coming through. And I'm ready to go.
All right, so now to do a take, it's the exact same thing. I'm just going to arm my transport to record, and then I already have Vincent's track to record, and I'm going to initiate play through Source Connect. So here we go, Vincent.
Signore Maestro.
Awesome. So there is a take. Now, one of the nice features in Source Connect is the review mode that we spoke about earlier. So here we've maybe done a whole series of takes and we want to play some stuff back and make sure that Vincent's happy with his performance. And that's pretty easy to do. Here I'm just going to take this take and I'm going to copy it down to a playback track. And then I'm going to play it back for Vincent. And instead of pressing play in Source Connect, I'm just going to press play in the DAW. And you're going to notice that instead of seeing this big loop of the red line going all the way back to send, it's just going to have a single line going straight from send to receive. And therefore, Vincent's going to hear that playback in sync on his system. So Vincent, check it out.
Signore Maestro. Sounds pretty good.
And there you go. So review is pretty useful for a lot of things. Here's a screenshot that shows the signal flow of the review mode in RTS. Essentially what's happening is that you are pressing play in the DAW. And then the play command goes all the way through to the receiver side. But the audio from the DAW also goes through. And those are the blue arrows on the top showing the arrows going to the right. So when that audio is received, it's received at the receiver side in sync. They're reviewing what you're playing to them in sync. This mode has been used a lot for doing traditional ADR, even pre-pandemic, where you would often have a talent at the same studio with an engineer. So now you have an engineer on both sides, and maybe the transport and everything is being run from the talent side of the connection. Traditionally, this was done sending timecode down one channel of a connection and maybe only one mic down the other. But the beauty of RTS is that you can actually have sync and you can still have a stereo connection. So you can send, in cases for ADR, a boom and a lav at the same time. This can be recorded on the remote side, and then using the queue manager, auto restore, and auto replace feature, files from the session don't even have to be sent back. So here we're going to do an example where now Vincent is no longer supposedly on the remote side, but Vincent is now on the local side, and we are at the same studio. So I'm going to switch Vincent over to my local record track. And here it's a stereo record, so I have 2 mics from Vincent. And now we're just going to run a session as normal. The beeps are heard directly from me for Vincent, and then I can just do a take as normal recording in Pro Tools. And when I hit play and record in Pro Tools, the sync will go straight across from send to receive. They will chase, and they will therefore hear in review in real time the take that's being recorded. Vincent, are you all ready?
I'm ready.
Here we go.
Signore Maestro.
And there we go. Perfect. So, review mode can be used not just for reviewing takes after an ADR recording, but it can also be used to review an entire mix. And so the setup for that would be as follows. The mix side of the connection will be using RTS, and they'll be the sender, so they'll need Source Connect Pro for that. The director side will need the video in their DAW timeline, or if they're using remote timeline, they will just need to have the remote timeline file from you, where there'll be the RTS receiver. Talkback can be done in a few ways, either inbound through Source Connect, or you can use an on-the-side communication system such as a phone call or a web meeting room. But you do need to take care that, echo is minimized, especially with Source Connect, because it doesn't have echo cancellation built in. It wants to transmit very pure audio. If you're going through Source Connect, you need to have a push-to-talk button for the director, either a microphone with a switch, or if they are using Pro Tools, they can use our Source Talkback plugin, which is very useful. The other thing is you can review, obviously, in surround sound using Source Connect Pro X. And in fact, if you do a review with a multi-connected Source Connect Pro X, so 2 7-1 connections, you can actually do Atmos review in real time. So in my setup here, I just have to change a few things essentially to do a review. I'm going to send my entire mix over to Source Connect. So here's my mix fader. I'm just going to unmute that send going to Source Connect, and then my talkback is already going to Source Connect. So that's all I need to do. And then whatever I play back for the director, that's what the director hears. So for example, I can solo the music. Or I can add the sound effects back in, or just solo the sound effects. Or anything else you would do in a typical mix session. And so the director can make any comments in real time, adjust levels, edits, really anything you want. It's a great way to review mixes in stereo, surround, or even Atmos if you're using 2 copies of Source Connect Pro in 7.1. So we have some best practices, of course. We have what we call an RTS checklist. You can find it on our website. It's also available if you just Google for RTS checklist, Source Elements, or Source Connect, you'll find it. In particular, you want to make sure that the song start is at 0 on the timeline. So bar 1, beat 1 needs to be the very top of the DAW timeline. The other thing that you want to make sure of, and this is very important, even though these are sort of MIDI and music type settings, you want to make sure that the tempos match. It has to be either a static tempo, or if you're using a tempo map, the tempo maps have to match. In Pro Tools, the tempo defaults to 120. You can turn off your conductor so you just have a static tempo, or you can just make sure you have a single tempo setting in your timeline. You obviously want to match your timecode settings on the 2 timelines, and you want to have, if you are using timecode offsets, that's fine, but you have to have the same timecode offset on both your DAWs on both sides of the connection. But you should note that if you are using timecode offsets, the timecode numbers reflected in Source Connect won't be offset, so they might not match. And therefore, it's maybe better not to use timecode offsets and just place the content in the timeline where it really is instead of offsetting to that timeline. The next thing is, in Pro Tools in particular, you can kind of optimize the performance of RTS. In your playback hardware settings, the playback engine hardware buffer, the lower the hardware buffer, the tighter the RTS sync resolution is. The downside of that is that as you lower that hardware buffer, plugins, like may become unstable depending on how beefy your system is. So we recommend 256 at least for a hardware buffer. 512 or 1024 should also be fine, but generally 256 and 512 are great settings. The other thing in the RTS panel is the send and receive delay that can be used to fine-tune the settings or the sync, because sometimes depending on latency going through the DAW in the DAW mixer or whatever routing is going on, you might need to slightly adjust. And so there's a send and receive delay at the bottom of Source Connect, but the one thing to note is that that is not available if you're using the Link plugin, because that's automatically calculated for you in that case.
Robert, really quick, do you want to go ahead and show that timecode offset?
Sure. So in Pro Tools, the timecode offset is here in your session setup window. And I'll try to show you an example here. So right now my offset is all zeros. So if I press play in Pro Tools, you notice that my 330 matches down here 330. But if I put an offset in Pro Tools here, say if I put like a 1 hour offset. So now if I hit play in Pro Tools is at 1 hour, but the RTS panel is at 0. And that's not so bad if you do whole hour offsets. You can sort of ignore the last number. But if you do half hour or other types of offsets that are not whole numbers, that can also get confusing. The point is that, RTS is syncing the timeline. It's not syncing timecode specifically. It's syncing from the beginning of the timeline to the end of the timeline. And what you call that timecode within that timeline, that's up to Pro Tools. So RTS still keeps it in sync, even though maybe the numbers you're looking at are different.
And can you talk a little bit about the send and receive delay that we were talking about before?
Sure. Depending on how you're routing audio to and from Source Connect, it's possible that there's some extra latency, or if you're not using delay compensation, maybe because you have a talent on microphone and you don't want them to hear that delay. For whatever reason, if you need to fine-tune the sync, there's a send and receive delay setting at the bottom of the RTS panel in Source Connect Pro. And you can put positive or negative numbers in here. This defaults to 80. We found that to be a pretty good setting. But in your system, it might indeed be 0 sometimes even. So this is just a general setting that works well, but you want to double check it and make sure that you're, with any system, you want to calibrate your sync to make sure that you're right in sync. And that's where you can fine tune it in RTS. RTS really is that simple once it's set up with the Rewire plugin in each workstation, or inherently it's part of the RTL program. It's really as simple as making sure that you are using the right play command for the desired sync direction. So just to reiterate, one of the biggest things is the sender of RTS always controls the timeline of the receiver, but depending on where the sender presses play, that's what determines the sync direction. So if the sender presses play in their DAW, then the receiver chases the sender. If the sender presses play in the RTS panel of Source Connect, then the sender chases the receiver instead.
When the file returns to the post house from the talent, is it synced?
It is, because Source Connect is chasing the talent and capturing it in the post house's DAW in real time, right on the timeline. So it's in sync the moment you record it.
Okay, so let's go back to the overdub mode slide showing that workflow.
Right, so that's where the arrows are going to the left. The play command goes, essentially what happens is the play button is pressed in the RTS panel of Source Connect, and that puts the talent into play first. The talent sees the picture, performs against the picture. The audio in the blue with the arrows going to the left is the talent performing. It goes back to the post house, and at that point, the post house goes into record and chases the talent. And so it's captured in the post house's DAW in perfect sync in real time.
Well, thank you once again. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. It was great to show you guys all this. Take care.
Source Elements.